I love to see the towns passing by and to ride these rails neath God's blue sky. Let me travel this land from the mountains to the sea, 'cause that's the life I believe He meant for me. And when I'm gone and at my grave you stand, say God called home your rambling man.
Welcome to Ramblin' Man Podcast, episode number 173. This one's with Steven Friedlander, and we talk about writing and publishing and art criticism, but kind of his history throughout all that. He was a great get. Former guest, Josh Shorey, highly recommended him, and I did not hold that against Steven. But this was a great conversation, and I really appreciate Steven for coming on and talking with me for so long. He doesn't have any websites or anything to follow. His art criticism series on local news site Compass, which is compassknox.com. If you haven't gotten a subscription to Compass Knox, it's only $9 or $10 a month, and they're doing great work over there. Go on there, subscribe, and you can find Steven's art criticism through there. And make sure to tell him Ramblin' Man sent you. It'd be nice to hear from Jesse and Scott that you subscribe because of Ramblin' Man. But yeah, I appreciate Steven for coming on. Sponsor this week is Feral Giant. Feral Giant is a graphic design, illustration, and social media consultation company based here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Though they do work for clients big and small all over the country, all over the globe, in fact. But they also do photography, videography, video editing, and audio editing, website design, SEO, writing, content development. Hell, they'll babysit your kids if it nets them money. So make sure you give them a follow on social media on either Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Feral Giant. And be sure to give them an email today and hire them for your next project. Without much further ado, here's the episode. Where are you originally from?
So I'm originally from New York.
Okay.
I was born actually in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And my parents moved to Riverdale, which is in the Northwest Bronx.
Okay.
When I was 3.5. Those were the days when Jews were leaving Brooklyn, not returning and living there.
Yeah.
So I grew up in New York City, in the Bronx, in Riverdale, and I was there all the way through college.
Okay. Now, when you were young and growing up, did you stay kind of in your borough, or were you on the train hopping, going to Manhattan and stuff?
Yeah. So when I got older, of course, when I was a teenager, I basically spent all of my time in Manhattan. Most of my friends lived in Manhattan, and I was very into music in those days. So I was going to concerts, at the old Palladium or Madison Square Garden or the Bottom Line, in my teenage years. And all of my friends lived, I would say 90% of them lived in Manhattan. So I was there all the time.
Okay. CBGB?
CBGB was a little after, so CBGB's was sort of early 80s. And I had come back from college and I was working. I was only there once, believe it or not. I don't even remember who I saw. I mean, I would pass CBGBs all the time, but I was working. I was a little older, and I sort of missed that by just a little, which kills me because, I could have gone to see the Talking Heads or Patti Smith or Elvis Costello or any of those people, and I didn't spend as much time there as I should have.
So have you ever seen the film After Hours? The Scorsese film?
Yes, but I don't remember it.
That's my favorite. I'm a film nerd, and that's my favorite Scorsese film.
Who was in it?
Griffin.
Griffin Dunn.
Griffin Dunn and
I
Roseanne. It had everybody in it.
yeah,
Like it had tons of people in it, but it is like cocaine. Like, but that early 80s art in New York where they would just take over a loft in an abandoned building
that's right.
kind of world.
I mean, the thing about Manhattan now, like Soho. I mean, when I was growing up, and I grew up in the 70s, I mean, you go down there and there was nothing there. I
Yeah.
mean, really nothing. I mean, it's changed so much for the better, for the worse, you can decide. But it's really a very different New York than the New York I grew up in. The New
Yeah.
York I grew up in was 42nd Street still existed. And if you
Yeah.
see some of those old movies, French Connection and all those movies, New York was just, it was dirty. It was, dangerous is relative, but it was certainly dangerous in a different way than perhaps it is
Right.
now. Now, New York is dangerous today for political reasons and what's going on in the Middle East. It's kind of different. But
Yeah.
there was a real 42nd Street. I mean, you couldn't walk down 42nd Street without getting hit up for various reasons,
Yeah.
And then it was Disneyfied kind of in the 90s.
Right. I think so my dad is also my dad and mom were both film nerds. And one of his gifts to me was The Taking of Pelham 123.
Oh, great movie. I remember that.
So there's a buddy of mine who's like, you got to watch this movie. Hold on, let me just play you the intro music. And I played him the intro music, and 3 seconds in, he was like, all right, I'm in. I'm watching this movie. This is going to be amazing. I was like, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Great.
And it's that 70s
Yeah.
New York.
Walter Matthau, right?
Yeah.
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 I remember.
Jerry Stiller, Robert Shaw. It's funny because
Wow.
the four people on the train are all someone. Like it's Martin Balsam, Robert Shaw, Hector Elizondo.
Wow.
And then the fourth one is the funny one. It's Wilson from Tim Allen's show, the guy who was always behind the fence. It's
Yeah.
that guy playing the fourth guy
Now,
in the film.
no one listening to this is going to know who Martin Balsam is.
Oh man,
I
come
do,
on.
but
Yeah.
nobody.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, 12 Angry Men is one of my favorite films, and he is great in it. So, uh, okay, so New York, 70s, 80s. What did your folks do for a living?
My mom stayed at home. She had been a school teacher before I was born and then stayed home. My dad was a white collar paper salesman, meaning he worked
Oh.
in those days. The mills would sell paper to various countries, but the mills used a middleman. That job has
Okay.
basically gone away because the mills realized they could do it themselves. But in those days, they didn't. So my dad worked in Manhattan in an office and would travel a lot to the countries, to the mills, and would, cut deals and that sort of thing. He did that for 39 years. I mean, he was one of those guys who worked at the same place for 39 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
different generation.
yeah. Yeah, my mom, she worked for the phone company. She started a week after she turned 18. And on her 31st anniversary, she retired. She had to
Yeah.
work an extra year because she popped out 2 kids.
Wow.
And she didn't get she had to make up that time, which is so silly. But
Yeah.
I was there on her last day carrying the boxes out of the office with her. She was
Wow.
like, I'm out. I'm done. I've done my time. I am out of here. Like
That's my dad too. He was there for 39 years. He was only 62 and he just said, "You know what? I don't want to do this anymore." And he
nice.
didn't. And he lived till he was 87. So, 25 years he just
That's
enjoyed New
awesome.
York. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when do you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I'm an only
Yeah,
child.
only child.
Yeah.
So when you were young, did they take you to like shows like Broadway or
Yes.
art museums or anything?
Yeah. So when I was 9 years old, my mother took me to see Hair.
Holy
And if you
crap.
know
Nine.
Hair,
Oh, God.
yeah, right. I mean, at the end of the first act, of course, they all take off their clothes.
Oh, God.
And I'm 9 years old sitting with my mom, but I kind of never forgot that. So I sang, I was a sort of singer performer when I was a kid, and I sang a lot. I had a
Okay.
pretty high voice. I really enjoyed singing all through school, all through high school. And Broadway was there. And, Broadway in those days was not nearly as expensive
Yeah.
as it is today. I mean, forget inflation. I was looking, for example, a concert, like to go see Paul McCartney in Knoxville is what, seven, eight, $900. I mean,
Yeah.
it's stupid. I used to go to concerts in Central Park for $10.
Yeah.
See Springsteen for $15. I mean, go to garden concerts for $20.
Yeah.
And so Broadway was affordable in those days. So I was a big sort of 70s musical kid, Pippin and Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. Saw all those shows. I'll never
Is
forget.
chess from the 70s too? Chess?
Chess,
Trying
I
to
think,
think.
was a little later.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, chess was a little later. I remember, I'll never forget seeing a chorus line for the first time. I mean, the music was spectacular, but at the end of the show, they bring out the mirrors. So they're all dancing, and I was sitting up top, and the mirrors come out. That's why you go see live shows. I mean, it was
Yeah.
spectacular.
Yeah.
So I did that a lot. And then in the 80s, I worked at a place called United Features, which
Yeah.
we did we edited and sent articles to small and medium-sized newspapers. It was sort of like
Yeah.
AP, but not quite. And we were getting second nights. So I was going the second night after the preview to shows once a week. I knew where all the movie screening places were. It was really fun. And because I was into that, it was even more fun. And I had no money. I mean, I was 25, 26, making no money, but that was my social scene. It was great.
Okay. So your liking of like Broadway and shows and everything, was there ever a point in school where you were taking like drama or any arts like that throughout growing
Yes.
up?
I mean, I took all I couldn't draw.
Okay.
That side of it wasn't sort of my thing, but I sang a lot. My claim to fame was playing against type and playing Nicely, Nicely Johnson in Guys and Dolls. Now, if you know, that was originally played by Stubby Kaye, and he's a big guy. In high school, I probably weighed, 100 pounds. So,
God.
but I could sing. And so, and interestingly enough, I always wanted to play that role. In Guys and Dolls, you sing if you play that role nicely, nicely. You sing Guys and Dolls, and you sing Sit Down, You Rock in the Boat. And for me, Sit Down, You Rock in the Boat is just a showstopper. I always wanted to sing that on stage. And my senior year in high school, we did that show. And I tried to, I tried to, I went out for different parts and I got to play nicely. So it was great.
And as far as like were you also into writing and reading a lot as a kid?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you
No,
write any of your own stories?
I knew I was going to be a writer when I was 10. My grandmother got me a subscription to Sports Illustrated when I was 9 years old. In those days, you either got a subscription or a subscription to both Boys Life or Sports Illustrated. And I think I got both and then kept Sports Illustrated. And, I was going to be the editor of Sports Illustrated. I mean, that was sort of,
Yeah.
but I kind of always knew. And in school, as much as I paid attention to school in those days, I was a writer and, I read a lot. English was very important to me.
Okay, so you mentioned sports. So who were your teams growing up, and did you get to go to a lot of games?
Yeah. So, I grew up in New York.
Yeah.
So I was a Mets fan, not a Yankees fan. I
Oh
was a
man.
Knicks fan. Um, not so much the Rangers. I wasn't that into hockey, but I was and the New York Giants. My dad was a New York Giants fan, so I was Giants and not Jets. And you really needed to choose. I think I was a Mets fan because they were a National League team, and my parents both grew up in Brooklyn. And in fact, my mom grew up a stone's throw from Ebbets Field,
Oh God. Yeah,
which of
that's
course
amazing.
was the Dodgers team. And she used to tell me stories. In those days, the players lived in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And she used to tell me stories about seeing Gil Hodges sort of, just walking home from the game.
That's a I am a diehard Dodgers fan.
Oh,
And
wow.
one of my favorite players growing up was Duke Snyder from the Brooklyn
Wow.
Dodgers day. Yeah, from the throwback days. I even read his autobiography when I was a kid. Uh, and it was great. Him and Mickey Mantle. I read both of their autobiographies were fantastic. But
Have you
yeah,
ever read, there's a book called The Boys of Summer.
no.
It's a book by Roger Kahn, and
Oh yeah.
and it's all about the Dodgers of the 40s and the 50s. And what's
Boys of
interesting
Summer.
about the book is he writes about how most of them, after playing with the Dodgers, had really difficult lives.
Okay.
So, like Carl Furillo, who played right field for the Dodgers in those days, ended up very bitter, wasn't making money, and was installing elevators, in Brooklyn. Um, there was a pitcher who was one of the last who passed away very recently, who's who had a son who had a lot of difficulty. And you know Khan goes into their stories. Gil Hodges died of a heart attack when he was very
Right.
young, 72, 73. They all had really tough lives. Anyway, the book is great if you're into the
Okay.
Dodgers.
Just added it
Cool.
to my list.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I can get my book club to read that book, but I will. This is not saying this. This is going to sound rough coming out of this mouth. I am the only straight man in my book club. It is all either women or gay men,
Wow.
and I'm like, no, I don't. I think one of them even likes any sports. The rest are like, no, I'm not doing sports. I was like, okay, it's fair enough.
All right.
I've tried to get him to read some books. I got him to month. Our book is James by Percival Everett. That's about Jim from Huckleberry Finn
Yeah, yeah,
from Huck Finn.
yeah.
It's about his life after,
Ah,
and
I've
it's
heard of that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, just came out.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
So you were into writing as a kid, Sports Illustrated. Man, you liked the Mets, but you were living in the Bronx. Whew.
Yeah,
Did you
but
catch any flack?
there were a lot of national leaguers. So I had
Oh,
friends
okay.
a lot of my friends were Yankees fans, but I had Mets fans as well.
Okay.
And I've sort of stayed a Mets fan. Like the best game I ever went to I was at the seventh game of the '86 World Series.
Oh my God.
And people forget the sixth game was the famous Bill Buckner game
Yeah.
where the ball
Yeah.
goes through his legs. And so the Mets win, it's 3-3, and it rains the next day. And so New York is on pins and needles. And I scored a ticket. I was sitting out in right field. I'll never forget Jesse Orosco throwing his glove up. What was so cool about that was coming back on the subway from Flushing back into Manhattan, where I was living at the time. I mean, I've never seen New York so happy.
Yeah.
Everyone on that subway was everyone's friend,
Yeah.
which in New York is not like that. And it brought the city together. It was great. So I went to that. I used to go to games a lot of basketball games at the Garden. You
Yeah.
sit up top, and um, sort of the Bernard King years, and
I was going to say you got to see Bernie. You got
yeah,
to
yeah,
see the.
saw Bernie and Ernie.
Oh
Yeah, it was
God.
great.
Okay, so you're reading, you want to be a writer, but were you also going to like art museums? Like, were you into art?
Yeah, not as
Like,
much, although I would go, and a lot of my friends or my girlfriends or whatever, like they'd say, let's go to the Met or let's go to MoMA. So, I mean, I wasn't going to galleries as much as I should have.
okay,
Um, and I think that can be intimidating if you're not, if you just don't know that world, particularly
yeah,
in those days when galleries were, spread out all over the city behind doors without signs. Like you sort
oh
of
yeah,
had to know the scene. Um, so not as much, but I'd go to the big ones. I loved the Museum of Natural History. I went there all the
yeah.
time. Um, the planetarium, I'd go there all the time. So, I did that, not as much as I probably should have. I was more into sports, and um, I did that a lot. And Broadway
Okay.
I did that a lot too.
Were you into comic books at all as a kid? Like,
No,
I'm
not
thinking
so much.
Marvel in New York. Like,
I collected baseball cards,
okay,
and I still have a lot of great cards, which I need to go through. Time passes and you don't go through them. I'm looking at them but I've got them in books, and I've got some good ones. One of these days, I'll sell them and give the money to my grandkid or something. I don't know.
so so when I was a kid and I started playing baseball, I started collecting baseball cards, and I went up to my grandparents' house. And I'm showing my grandfather these baseball cards because he sat there and watched the Cubs because it was on back then in the early 80s, WGN
Yes.
Cubs baseball.
Yeah.
That's the only baseball you could watch. It was before TBS started broadcasting the Braves. So I don't even know if he liked the Cubs. He just would watch them.
Yeah.
And he didn't say a word. He just got up, went down to the basement, came up with a cigar box, Mickey Mantle, Hank Aaron, like all these cards that he had saved from my dad and his brothers when that they would put in the spokes of their bikes and
Right.
ride around, like
Right.
that kind of stuff. And I've got these little like metal tin things that have baseball players. It's insane.
Wow.
And then like a few years later, football, and I go up there and he did the same damn thing. And he came up with another cigar box. And the first one he pulled out was a Johnny Unitas card.
How cool.
And when he passed away, all of my uncles pointed to me and they're like, he gets the cards.
Wow.
Because
So do you have them?
oh yeah, they're in my closet in there.
That's
And
so
one
cool.
year for Chris, one of the best Christmas presents I've ever bought for anybody. He loved Mark Grace, who played first base for the Cubs.
Yep.
And I went and got him Mark Grace's rookie card when I was 10. And I
Wow.
gave it to him. And my grandfather was World War II, tough, big dude, scary. And it was amazing. It was
Oh
amazing
man.
to see him kind of break at that. I
That's
was like,
that's
yeah, here
awesome.
you go, Papa.
Yeah.
uh, okay. When you were growing up, what was it that made you know you were going to be a writer? Was it like one particular article in Sports Illustrated that stood out, or was it just it in general?
No, I think I just started writing. My earliest memory of writing is in 1969. I guess I was in fourth grade. I remember writing a one-page piece about opening day for the Mets. And in those days, the Mets would always lose opening day. And now remember, this is 69. This was their magic year.
Yeah.
But opening day, and they lost, I don't remember to who, but they lost 10-9, but they were ahead like 9-5 or some crazy thing. So I wrote this piece, oh, the Mets lost again. And of course they did. And that was the first piece where I kind of went, I think I can do this.
Okay.
Um, and I just, I kept writing. Now, for me, school was never the point. I've, of course, changed now that I teach, but
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
yeah, but
No, school's very important.
school was never a thing for me. I mean, you know, I read the books, I wrote the papers, and I cared, but I cared in a very sort of nonchalant way. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, the best I tell this story. Can I tell a story about?
Yeah, go for it.
So I had one English teacher in high school. I kept taking the same English teacher, and I really loved her. Her name was Jane Benditson. She was just great. And I think I model some of my teaching now on her. And she was probably in her 40s, 50s, and she just didn't take any crap, which was great because she held our feet to the fire. And, I'd get B's, but I think she saw in me something. And she was a great teacher because I wrote this piece. It was a creative writing piece that I wanted to publish in our creative writing journal, whatever in high school. And so I gave it to her, and she said, yeah, come back and I'll give you some feedback. So she reads it. She says, come back. And I come back. It's like Friday at 3 o'clock. And she says, Steven, sit down. And I knew something was up. And she says, we have a problem. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, you didn't write this. And I said, well, what do you mean? Of course I did. She went, no, you didn't write this. Nothing you have written for me in the last 2.5 years suggests you are capable of writing this piece. Well, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? She said, not only did I read it, I showed it to a couple of other your teachers, and they said, no way Friedlander did this. There's no way. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, what do you want me to do? She said, listen, I don't know, but plagiarism is a really serious issue. It's Friday. You go home and think about it. Come back Monday. We'll talk about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Now, weekends in New York, when I was in 12th grade, were for concerts and parties and hanging out.
Yeah.
So I went home, and starting Friday at 5 o'clock, I just started typing on my trusty electric Smith Corona typewriter. And I typed all weekend. And my mom came in, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. I'm just feeling creative. And I wrote 50 pages of short stories, story 3 pages, story 4 pages. I just kept writing and pouring it out. So Monday, I I finish. I go back Monday, 9 o'clock. I hand them to Mrs. Benditson. She says, all right, come back at the end of the day. We'll talk. I come back at the end of the day, and she says, all right, sit down. And I'm like shaking. And all she says to me, she looks me right in the eye. All she says to me is, okay, now what are you going to do? And that was it. Now, I maintain, of course, she knew I wrote that piece. She knew, but that was her way of getting to me and of
Yeah.
really lighting a fire under me because nothing else had worked. She scared the crap out of me, but it got me writing.
Yeah.
And, I tell that story, and some people think it's sort of overly manipulative, but I don't think so. And particularly for me, because she knew me very well. And she knew, all right, how am I going to get to Friedlander? This is how we get to him. And it worked. So that was my
So,
first, 20 short stories. And that's when I kind of realized I could do that kind of work as well.
okay. So here's a question. When you're going through all this, are your parents very encouraging, or are they kind of I don't know how to say it. It's like because you're in a big city, or they're like you go out and you come back, kind of you're on your own,
Yeah,
and
pretty
they
much.
don't know the ins and outs of everything.
That's right. No, this
That's right.
is sort of, mid 70s New York.
Yeah,
They had their own issues, and we don't need to go into that, but they had
yeah,
their own issues. And I mean, I was closer to my mom than my dad, but they didn't really know what was going on.
okay. I had the same experience. I went to my own parent teacher conferences because I was there for football.
Right.
So I was done with football. I would change clothes and walk back into the school, and I had one English teacher get like almost shaking angry at me.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm here to discuss how I'm doing. And she was like, where are your parents? I was like, working.
Yeah.
And she got so, she was I'm gonna tell you a short story. So God, I can't get through an episode without talking about Fulton because
Yeah.
it's where I'm from
Sure,
and I
sure.
love it. And it means so much to me. Oh God, I forgot. In our meeting, I talked about Fulton. It could have been a drinking game, how often I mentioned Fulton. But it was a teacher from West who was used to money, used to parents with money,
Mm.
the Sequoia Hills kids and all that.
Hmm.
And so she came into Fulton and it blew her mind that there were kids in this class she was like, so when you go to college, and they're like, I'm not going to college. I already have a kid. Like,
Mm.
what are you talking about? I'm going to work.
Wow.
Like, and it was almost like it did not compute in her head. So we were in block scheduling. It got down to the last, section of the semester. It was block scheduling semester and semester instead of going for an entire year in English. So I sat her down. I had like a 37, 42. I had something that was just god awful because we were reading Shakespeare and I didn't like Shakespeare. But I would go home. You're a teacher. I would go home and read 2 or 3 books a week, even though I was playing sports, working at a ball field, taking care of my little sister. I still read because I love to read. But I
Mm.
was reading like Sherlock Holmes and stuff like that. Winds of War by Herman Woolcock. I remember that book.
Yeah.
Uh, Books that we weren't reading in school. And I sat her down and I said, hey, I don't want to be in here next semester. Do you want me in here next semester? And she said, no. It's like, okay, so how can I remedy this? And she was like, well, if you read a book and write a 1-page essay on what you learned in that book, I will grade those. And it was a lot. I had to do a lot in that last chunk to bring my grade up to a 70, which was a D minus
Mm.
to pass.
Right.
And in class on the last day, I wrote 3 of them in class on books. I sat there with the book and I was like, oh, yeah, this. And I wrote by hand, here you go, hand it to her. Then wrote another and hand it to her, then wrote another one. And at that point, she was like, enough. You got a 70. You passed. It's like, cool,
Wow.
cool. Thanks. What's funny is all my grades in my other classes were all 100s because it was all art, graphic arts, math. It was all that stuff. All that was straight A's. But English, I was like, I just don't like Shakespeare, man. It's not for me. It's not for me. I'll read all these other things till the hills come home or till the cows come home. But I had zero interest in Shakespeare.
Huh. Well,
And I even had one teacher before she got mad at us because she gave us The Great Gatsby. And she's like, can't you all understand how brilliant this is? I was like, it's about rich people. Like we're wrong audience, man. Wrong audience.
wrong audience. Although I have to say, the last page of The Great Gatsby is one of my favorite. I mean, if you ask me what are the 5 favorite pieces of writing that Friedlander
Yeah.
likes, that last page blows my mind. And I
Okay.
read it 5 times a year. I mean, not the whole book, but I'll
Okay.
look back at that last page. Really good.
Now I'm gonna have to go back and Gatsby last
Just
page.
go to Google and look at the last page.
Okay. Yeah, I was like any stupid 17-year-old kid. I read On the Road, like, and it
It's a great,
blew my mind
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
changed everything. Uh, excuse me. So you want to be a writer. So you said you stayed in New York through college. So where did you go to college?
So I went to college in upstate New York, in Clinton, New York, which is about 20 minutes from Utica, at a place called Hamilton College,
Okay.
a small liberal arts school, 1,500 students in leafy upstate New York.
And Leafy, how far from Buffalo?
Yeah, it's Buffalo is western. This is more the east.
Okay.
So, gosh, 3 or 4 hours from Buffalo.
Okay.
And it was about 3 or 4 hours from Manhattan.
And I know it's the same, but being out in the open like that and dealing with snow, was that
I
in the
mean, this is
winters?
again this is before the weather changed. So
Oh, okay.
it was really cold and it snowed all the time. So there was snow on
Uh,
the ground, from October 28th till what seems like May 1st, although probably not that bad. But it was very cold and very snowy
and very wide open up there,
and
I
very
gotta
wide
assume.
open. Yeah.
So was
And
it kind of a culture shock going there or
well, I went to a school that was small. My graduating class in high school was only 100 kids. So I was kind of used to
oh,
that
okay.
environment. And that's why I went there. And I also went there because Mrs. Benditson, my English teacher, told me to go there.
So
Uh,
when you go there, do you take writing? Do you take journalism?
no, I mean
What was your
it
major?
was a um, liberal arts school. So
Okay.
you take all. I majored. I was going to major in psychology, but I ended up majoring in English. And you take philosophy and English classes and psych classes and the professor small classes, and it was great. I again was not much of a student in those days. Again, kind of ironic. Um, but I was too into other stuff. Um, but I had great professors, and I look back on the classes I took. Gosh, I still think about some of those classes. And interestingly enough, I took a lot of English classes, read a lot of psych classes, but there was one art history class I took
Hmm.
that I still think about. And when I write my pieces, and this is a long time ago, but I still go, okay, now how did we think about art in those days? How did my professor teach me to look at art? And while I didn't write about art, for decades, it was always in the back of my mind. Those kind of professors stick with you. Those
Yeah.
kind of classes stay with you. So, got a great education and then went back to New York and just started working. How I got my gig story is I was in a bar in Utica, drinking with a friend. This is when the drinking age was 18,
Oh, yeah.
New York, 18, and I think I must have been 20. And it was the summer, it was really hot, and I was in a bar called the Devereaux in Utica, New York, and sitting with a friend, we're drinking, and I hear someone talking about Harper's Magazine. Now, in those days, Harper's, The Atlantic, The New Yorker were sort of the three, thinking
Yeah.
man's magazines. And it turned out he worked at Harper's. So, I was sort of a ballsy kid in those days. And I said, hey, can I buy you a drink? So I did. And when we were all done drinking, I said, hey, I'm going to be done soon. Can I stay in touch with you? He said, sure. So in those days, you either wrote letters or you used the telephone. That was it. There was no other way to contact people. There were no cell phones. That was it. There was no internet. So I wrote him letters and I said, hey, I'd love to stay in touch and I'm going to need a gig. Well, he had moved to a place called United Business Publications and was working for a magazine in 1981 called Home Video, which was a magazine, as you might guess, that covered both the burgeoning cable industry and the technical side, which was essentially, VHS versus beta.
Yeah.
So there were some sister business publications, one of them called Audio Visual Communications, that
These
covered
names.
oh man, that covered the AV world.
Yeah.
And there was a gig. He said, I'll set you up with the editor. He set me up with the editor. I had an in. I got the gig. So that launched my career. And, I worked there for about a year and a half. A gig opened up at Home Video. I had started writing network and cable sports previews. So I
There
was
you go.
21 and I was writing for a national magazine. I mean, it was really cool thinking back, and was working with really interesting people, great editors, meeting people, was really lucky. Um, you know, John Perales, who is still writing about music for the New York Times in 2024, I remember in 1981, him sort of shuffling in. He must have been 23. And, we're giving him assignments to write about music. I met Kurt Anderson. I met a lot of interesting people. Anyway, so I got a gig at Home Video, and that meeting in that bar and subsequently getting that gig at Home Video led to my first 5 or 6 jobs in New York.
Why was that? Do you know why that guy was in Utica?
He lived in Utica. He was from
He-
Utica.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was from Utica. He was, visiting his mom or something.
Oh my God. Okay. And so you're working in there. Are you working is it based in Manhattan
Yeah, yeah.
proper?
So I had come back. I was living at home for a little while. So yeah, I was working at Home Video. I got a taste of the magazine industry quickly because the magazine folded at Christmas, 6 months after I started. Which is, the way the magazine
Yeah,
industry
the way it
works.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. But the editor of Home Video, it's a guy named Robert Vare, said to me, I really want you to keep working for me. I'm going to do a parody of Playboy magazine.
Okay.
And this is all pre-Spy, but in those days, there were a lot of parodies being done. And he was starting a company called American Parody and Travesty. And he said, it's going to be a few months. You may have to go get a gig, but I will hire you. You'll be my associate editor. You come and you run the office, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I was working hard in those days because you want to impress people. So he started it. We got an office in the old Flatiron building. So I
Nice.
worked in the Flatiron building in this tiny little office, again, 1983. And so the summer of 83, we did a parody of Playboy. And, it was fantastic. I was 23. I was meeting people. Robert trusted me to do things. My best story there is Robert knew Kurt Anderson, and Kurt Anderson and oh gosh, his name just went right out of my head. Kurt Anderson and the guy who is the editor of Vanity Fair forever.
Is it
Graydon
Graydon
Carter.
Carter?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Graydon
Graydon
Carter.
Carter. So, this is
How did
all,
I pull that one out?
that was
Holy.
very good. So Graydon Carter and Kurt, of course, started Spy in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
But this is before, and I think Kurt was writing for Time at the time. And this is before Graydon Carter was Graydon Carter. And, he'd come into the office. It was 11 o'clock. He'd already been, at the pub. And, they'd come in and we'd riff on ideas and the like. But, I got to meet all these guys before they were really who they were.
Yeah.
So it was great. So I did that. And then I got a gig at United Features, and I was there for about 3.5 years. Editing, you sat at a computer, you edited, you wrote. I did a lot of, I was very into sort of covering arts and culture and media and that sort of stuff. So I just edited those articles for years. Did that for 3.5 years, was living in Manhattan, later moved to Brooklyn with my girlfriend, and so I had been doing United Features for 3.5 years. I was pretty tired of it. There was a magazine in New York called Avenue, which covered, it was for and about wealthy people, essentially. It started as a very slick magazine that was delivered by boys in, jackets and pants to people who lived on Park Avenue. It later grew to sort of 90,000, 100,000 high-income zip codes, throughout the country.
Yeah.
And I applied for a gig there, got that, did that for about 1.5 years. Met interesting people, liked it. My favorite Avenue story is we were doing a piece about New York real estate in the late 80s. And in those days,
I'm crossing all my fingers here.
in those days, the Japanese were buying up New York because the Japanese stock market had, gone way up. They had the money, not unlike Russian oligarchs today, but in those days, the Japanese were buying up New York. And so we wanted to do a piece on what Manhattan real estate people thought about what was happening. So my editor said, call the usual people. So I did. I'm sitting at my desk, 9 o'clock one morning, the phone rings. Of course, phones are sitting on your desk in those days.
Yeah.
I'm eating my bagel and I pick up the phone. Steven, it's Donald Trump. What can I do for you?
God.
And Jody, I'm not kidding. He'd still be on the phone with me today if I had let him keep going.
Oh, God.
Now,
I think,
yeah.
when we reelect him, he's going to do good things for this country. I'm just kidding. That is a Jimmy Pardo joke of like, anytime he has someone come in that doesn't know him, he's like, I think, we're all going to vote for him. We think he's going to do great things. We got to give him one more chance to right this ship.
So I do get to say I did talk to the president, and he, in those days, Trump was just a New York developer. That's all he was.
Yeah.
And, he gave me a couple of good quotes, and that was the end.
He was still a schmuck, but
once a schmuck, always a schmuck. But he, but he gave me some good quotes. So, and then summer of 88, my girlfriend, who became my wife, was also a freelance writer. And she had been writing for this company in Knoxville.
Oh, okay.
Had been doing freelancing for some of their publications. There was this custom magazine company that existed here.
And I'm trying to remember what year they took over that building.
Well, we moved in 91. I'll
Okay.
I'll tell you all about that story.
I will go. Can I go backwards just for a second?
Sure.
So when you're writing and editing as your job, you're taking it a lot more serious than you did as a student. It was what clicked, and
Yeah,
it was there a was it, did that start at the first job where you were writing when you were editing about videotapes and stuff like that, or
totally. Yeah. Once I
from
got
minute one?
yeah, once I got the gig, it sort of clicked and I took it
Okay.
all very seriously.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you keep up with like in writing for the tech and audio stuff? Did you become did you enjoy that? Like, are you now like a tech or audio or video nerd at all?
No, I stopped paying attention at Microsoft 3.1.
Oh, gee. Oh, good. Oh, God. I will tell you. So my day job is in insurance, but I'm in marketing in the insurance world, and I have started having to learn a lot about insurance. And one of the scariest things I've found, because we talk about like cybersecurity a lot and cybersecurity insurance, is there are some places like KUB. I won't say KUB, but there's one in, let's say, Oklahoma that's still running on like Windows 98.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you can shut down a power grid because one entire system is running on Windows 98. So you say Windows 3.1, and I'm just getting oh yeah, I was almost shaking going to talk to my boss, like, we're all doomed. We're screwed. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Totally. I gave up with 3.1, and I think at Whittle we used a program called Xywrite,
okay.
which was great, for the time. But for me, computers, I mean, I remember computers, big mainframes at
Yeah.
school when you take the phone and put it on in 1972, 1973, and I would go in and play. There was this game called Star Trek.
I'm
And
trying to remember. Yeah.
I mean, this is again 1973, and you put the phone in and you'd type stuff in. It would take 5 minutes, and it would,
Oh, okay.
stuff would come back. There was no screen. It was all paper. You'd get the dots if you wanted to play the game again, the rolled up paper.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, and so I was into it to a degree and knew it when I got to Avenue and I was working, and I was very into it. I didn't want to be the tech guy anymore.
Okay.
And people would come to me all the time. Hey, can you fix this? Hey, can you? And I could, but I didn't want to be that guy. And the trap door just shut. My friends will tell you today I'm hopeless because I stopped paying attention.
And was there any itch to get to go to sports,
So I
like
mean,
during any of the?
I still wrote about sports. I still wrote
Okay.
about culture, um, as the years passed, particularly United Features. So I kept doing it. I was
Okay.
freelancing. I was doing profiles for various magazines. So I kept my hand in it. Um, but
Did
then
you ever get an article in Sports Illustrated?
I got a letter in Sports Illustrated.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah. Which,
Okay.
in those days was pretty cool. One of my hobbies in those days was getting letters to the editor into those sorts of magazines.
Yeah.
So I got 4 or 5 letters in Entertainment Weekly.
Okay.
Very proud of that. I got a letter in Sports Illustrated. I got a letter in Oxford American. My big coup was I got a letter in the New York Times Magazine section. Um,
Okay.
so I was very proud of that. Was sort of one of my stupid little hobbies.
So your wife gets a freelance gig in this podunk town in East Tennessee where everything is orange. Uh,
And she said, there are some jobs down there. Why don't you apply?
yeah.
And there were a couple of gigs that were open. And
At Whittle Communications.
yes, so
Yeah.
at Whittle Communications. which I really knew about a little. I'd had a friend, Brooks Clark, who's still here in Knoxville, who had worked at Sports Illustrated, who had moved down here. We had a friend named Annie Kruger, who Katie Kuntz had worked with. She had moved down here. So we knew people had started to move from the New York Magazine world to Knoxville. So it was like a thing. And then Bill Rukeyser left Time Inc. and moved down here to be Chris's sort of managing editor over at it. So it was a big deal. You know, we were sort of tracking this movement from New York City publishing to Knoxville at Whittle. So there were a couple of gigs and people responded. I got recruited and I got hired. So November, December 98. No, 88. I'm sorry.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Widow was gone by 98. So 88, we moved down here.
I'm trying. So my remembrance of Whittle is that they put TVs in all the middle schools and broadcast Channel 1, that during homeroom we would watch Channel 1.
That's right.
And we got to tour. God, this is going to be one of those things. We were in the same place at the same time because we got to tour Whittle Communications. I think when I was in middle school, maybe early high school.
Of the building,
I remember
the new building.
Of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was born in 78, so that would have been 89 to 92 in middle school, and then 90. It couldn't have been after 92 or 93. It had to. I think it was middle school.
Yeah.
89 to 92 that we got to tour.
You know, when I moved down here, I was working in the Third National Bank building across the street from the building. And a Whittle was spread out in 6 or 7 different buildings, Andrew Johnson building. We were in a whole bunch of buildings. And then in 91, it's kind of ironic, you know, and we moved in the fall of 91. And I'll never forget going home. We all moved in. There was a big party. There were clowns running through the hall. In the courtyard, there were people on stilts. I mean, it was nuts. And I remember coming home and saying, it's over.
Really?
Yes, I really have that memory. And in fact, 6 months later, it was more or less over.
Okay.
You know, I could do 3 hours on Whittle, but the short story is, yes, there was Channel 1, which started 89, 90. Chris sort of moved away from what was the core of the company, which was custom publishing. So, you know, for 15, 16 years, that was the company, magazines. Chris decided to move into other media. Remember, this is pre-internet. And so the Channel 1 was sent via, you would get a head end, what was called a head end unit, a VCR in your school's principal's office. It was bounced up to a satellite at 3 a.m. It came back down to your head end unit, recorded, and then the teacher could view it and push play and it would broadcast. There were televisions in every classroom.
Yeah.
And the bargain was, and some people called it a Faustian bargain, you would get televisions in every classroom in return for 2 minutes of advertising. So it was a 12-minute show, and there were 2 minutes of advertising. You know, it would all be different today, of course, but in those days, the press was brutal, just brutal. I would argue a Today Show for students is pretty important.
Yeah.
Students don't know anything about current events. And it was, I think, a pretty good show. People don't realize Anderson Cooper, Lisa Ling, Tracy Altschul, Tracy Smith, all got their start on Channel 1.
For some reason, I thought some of the newscasters were like high school kid, like younger, maybe college,
They
but
were in
maybe
their
there were.
20s, you know, early
Okay.
20s. Um,
Uh, you said the about the press being mad that there were 2 minutes of commercials. I'm thinking, well, hell, nowadays it would be the reverse. It would
right?
be 2 minutes of news and 12 minutes of
Yeah.
commercials
Um,
for that.
but it was a big deal. You know, it was in 10,000 high schools and middle schools. It was a success in certain ways. I must say, I was telling my students, this is maybe 3 years ago. Now, I realize when I say Widow Communications to 20-year-olds who were born after the turn of this century, that they don't, you know, they don't know Widow
Yeah.
Communications. They, what's a little frightening is they don't know the building. You know, they know the other end of Gay Street, but they don't know that end so well. So I'll say, you know, that big Jeffersonian courthouse, that was a media company. Really? Oh no, really? What are you talking about? But the scariest thing for me was I was talking about Channel One, a couple of kids, oh, my older brother, you know, that sort of thing. But I said, yes, did you know that Anderson Cooper got his start here in Knoxville? He didn't live here, but you know, he got his start working at Channel One.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the room was silent. And I said, now, guys, you do know who Anderson Cooper is, right? Not one
Wow.
student.
So not to one up you, but it was around the Super Bowl this year. And some of the people I work with, the youngest one I think is 22, but there's one who is 20, turned 28 yesterday. And I asked her, I said, does the name Arnold Schwarzenegger mean anything to you? And she said, didn't he land on the moon?
Ah, wow.
And I literally bent over and put my hands on my knees. And I was just
Wow.
like, no, no, no. What are they not teaching you in school? No. And she's like, oh, he said that one thing in that movie. I said, well, he said like a dozen things, but but yes, yes. And it was just I have this theory when it comes to that. I have this theory when kids now have access to everything, so they don't look at anything. Whereas when you were young or when I was young, it had to be a friend's cool older brother or sister, an uncle, your parents. Somebody had to be like, oh, you haven't heard of Pink Floyd? Let me let you in on this
Yeah.
and start playing you and explaining why it's great. Whereas the kids now are like, what's that? And the turning point that made me realize this was when that dude blew up on TikTok for riding his skateboard, drinking cranberry juice to the Fleetwood Mac song. And then that was in the pandemic. And then Fleetwood Mac started blowing up. So Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks both created TikTok pages. Stevie Nicks was sitting in front of a piano. I still remember this, wearing a roller skate. I don't know why, with some cranberry juice sitting there singing the song. And the comments were from young people going, who is this old lady singing this song?
I mean, I
And
can't.
it's like, you don't have the cool older brother or sister or uncle. And it sucks for you because you are going to miss out on great things or you're going to dismiss great things because you don't understand the time and place and context for it all. Having my dad sit me down and make me watch Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 was a pivotal moment in
Yeah.
my life. And the kids today do not have that anymore.
No,
Anymore.
that's absolutely right. You know, not to sound like the old dude,
Yeah.
but I do maintain as it relates to music, for example. You know, I was very into music in the
Yeah.
1970s, very into it. Well, there were only a couple of ways to learn about music in those
Yeah.
days. You either listened to the radio all the time, or you'd go to Tower Records and
Hmm.
maybe listen, or a friend would turn you on to a song.
Yeah.
That was it. And when you bought an album, and of course it was albums, I was someone who would read all the liner notes and I would learn about musicians. And the other way was you either read Rolling Stone or you read Crawdaddy or you got your hands on one of the English publications.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, Rolling Stone, people don't understand anymore, but every 2 weeks, I would read Rolling Stone cover to cover. In
Yeah.
some ways, I learned how to write by reading the record reviews in the back of Rolling Stone. I was so obsessed with the record reviews in Rolling Stone that in my 20s, as I was really trying to learn my craft, I remember taking 3x5 cards and putting them into my trusty Smith Corona and typing the leads from 100 or so record reviews, just the leads.
Wow.
And I would mix them up and just read them. So I didn't know, oh, was this Crosby, Stills, and Nash? Was this Led Zeppelin? It didn't matter. I just was reading the lead. And I think it really helped me learn about music and learn about how to think about and write about music.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're going to find this sad or awesome, but when I was in college, you could subscribe to magazines for like $1 to $3 a year.
Sure.
So I subscribed to 25 to 30 magazines and I would read them cover to cover every month. Because
Cool.
I also read comic books and books. So I was just used to always reading. And I would read the album reviews and be like, okay, this album review got good reviews in got mentioned in 10 magazines and got good reviews in 8. I'm going to go buy this. Even though I don't know anything about this weird independent artist, I'm
Yeah.
going to go buy this album.
Yep.
And that led me to like one of my favorite albums of all time is this guy DJ Shadow, who had this album called Introducing. And I found it because I read those magazines and was like, okay, everybody across the board is saying this is great. I'm going to go buy it and see what I think. I wouldn't even listen to it. I'd be like, nope, I'm going to go buy this because it was also $9 at the
Right.
time
Right.
for a CD. I was like, I've worked hard. I'm going to go buy this album. Go
Right.
to Disc Exchange and buy the album. So yeah, oh my God. Now I'm curious if you still have those cards. Could you like pull one out and be like, Fleetwood Mac? This one's Fleetwood Mac.
Probably.
Probably.
I bet I could. The other thing too, what you just talked about, if people who know me know, my favorite word is connections,
Mhm.
but in all its ways, not just the connections that you make because your dad might know someone, not your family connections, but intellectual connections and cultural connections. I
Mhm.
I I use that word 100 times in my class every night. And my daughter makes fun of me because I use that word all the time. And what you just described was an example of cultural connections. Well, I'll tell you one story. Again, I really read albums. I wanted to
Mhm.
know who was playing the bass on that, Linda Ronstadt song. So, sure enough, during the pandemic, we were teaching online, of course. And I wanted to entertain my students, but frankly, Jody, I wanted to entertain me. And so,
Okay.
and so I thought I'm going to start trying to get really interesting people to speak to the class who might be a little bit outside the normal, well, let's get a communications and marketing person or let's get an editor, blah, blah, blah. So I thought I'm going to try to get Leland Sklar. Well, Leland Sklar, you know
Uh,
who he is?
yep.
Well, that's
Yep.
cool.
Yeah.
Leland Sklar, the long white beard. Well, he's played on thousands of albums.
I'm
Thousands.
trying. Is he still alive? He's still alive.
He's very much still alive. And he played on Jackson Brown and all of those 70s and 80s
Yeah.
sort of softer rock stuff. He toured with Phil Collins. Well, I wanted to get Leland Sklar. So
Yeah.
I looked for him. I'm pretty good at finding people. He had a Facebook page. I sent him a Facebook message. Hey, I've got this class, 5 o'clock on Thursdays. Would you like to talk about what it's like to be in the industry for 40 years and what it's like to be interviewed? Blah, blah, blah. Jody, he got back to me in 10 minutes.
That's a, that's awesome.
I would love to, Steven. Tell me when I'll be there. And sure enough, no one in the class knew who Leland Sklar was, but I did. And, we talked to make it relevant. We talked about how to prepare for an interview and what it's like to interview a musician and all that stuff. But man, he was great. And I was asking him
Yeah.
questions about, what was it like to play on a Jackson Brown album back in
Yeah.
1975 or to play on a Linda Ronstadt? I mean, it was great. But that was the sort of connection that one makes across generations, across decades. But you have to know stuff. You have to really get into the meat of it to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was being raised by my parents because my dad was into a little bit of everything. So he would listen to Otis Redding, Charlie Daniels Band, ZZ Top, Pink
Mm,
Floyd, but then like Buddy Miles,
wow.
like, and that's like a deeper cut
Yeah,
for 99.9% of people.
totally.
And he's like, listen to this, now listen to this, now listen to this. And then my mom was into Bette Midler, Barbara Streisand, Richard Marx, all the schmaltzy stuff. So I get all the schmaltzy stuff from Celine Dion,
Right,
from her.
right.
But having those two mix, my favorite band is an Icelandic band called Sigur Rós.
Oh my gosh,
The,
I love Sigur Rós.
yes, I'm seeing them with an orchestra at the Ryman in September or October. And my buddy who's going with me, I told him, I was like, I'm going to cry the entire show, and I'm just preparing you now. It is not a pretty sight. I will just sit there. I will cry, and it will.
That's spectacular. I can't remember the name of the song, nor would I be able to pronounce it. But
Okay.
there's that video where the kids are on the mountain and they march and they march up and then they sort of fly.
I'm pretty sure that's Sagliopor,
Okay.
because that's my favorite album of all time is Talk. That when
Wow.
I bought the CD at Best Buy, I had here's another old school thing that's kind of not that old school, but is. I had a 96 Mitsubishi Montero that had a 10 disc changer in the
Oh,
back.
nice.
So I pulled that cartridge out, put in Sigur Rós, put it in there, hit play before I before I left, put it in drive, and I sat in my car and cried for like 5 straight minutes because I was like, there are no words. There are no words for what is happening right now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, yeah. So that's what I mean. It's like, hell, I remember there was one of I was the only kid for like 10 years. And then I have cousins that are like 10 years younger. My sister's 11 and a half years younger than me. So I took her to all the cool shows. I took her to see Lou Reed, took her to
Mm,
see Elvis Costello, like all those shows when she was a kid that she didn't understand what was happening. And then cool people like indie bands and stuff. But uh one of my cousins, I remember his parents caught him listening to Marilyn Manson, and they were worried. And I sat him down and I literally broke down like the song Beautiful People. I was like, here's what he means by this. I
wow.
was like, I know it sounds angry and you want to punch somebody and all that, but this is what this song means. It has a deeper meaning, and here's what it means. And I was like, so and had to tell his parents, I was like, he's fine. It's fine.
That's
It's
great.
all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. Good Lord. Okay. Enough. Well, here is a name I'm curious if you know. Do you know Bill Frisell?
I know him. Not, I mean, I don't listen to him, but I know him.
He is one that if you go down the rabbit hole, what he has played on is nuts.
Huh.
And this is his new album where it's him and a few guys in an orchestra, and it's a phenomenal album. He was here for Big Ears, and I met him in passing. And I have been listening to him since 96. Same thing. There was a magazine called New Country that came with a CD.
Uh-huh.
Now, it would not have it would have maybe one or two crappy country songs, but it would have like Dale Ann Bradley, who's from Eastern Kentucky as an independent bluegrasser, Chris Thiele from Nickel Creek when he was still a kid. But one of them was a Bill Frisell song called Give Me a Holler. So I've been a fan of his since 96, 96, 97. And he passed by me. He was walking out. And I looked at him, and I know I'm a big dude. And sometimes I forget that part. And I just looked and went, holy shit, man. And I was like, I grabbed his shoulder. I was like, you're awesome. And I saw you, and I'm a huge fan. And he was like, thanks, man. Thanks, man.
Wow.
But I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God.
I mean, those sorts of experiences. Okay, what's the favorite show you've ever been to?
Uh, that's hard. I think seeing Sigur Rós at the Ryman was pretty fantastic because it took forever for me to get there. I saw Peter Gabriel last year in
Ooh,
Columbus, Ohio, and he played a lot off his new album, but that was pretty fantastic. No, never mind. I know what it is. I saw Prince at Thompson Bowling in like '06 or something.
that's cool.
And it was like this is stupid. Like that's another one I took my little sister to. And it was like you don't, maybe it was even like '01 or '02. It was whenever Musicology came out. And it's probably the best show I've ever seen.
Wow.
But I've also been to shows at like the Pilot Light where it's me and 7 other people standing around this guy, Scott H. Byron from Texas, the dirty old one-man band where he's playing a guitar, but he's also foot stomping on a box. And it's 7 of us in a sweaty venue. I don't think they had a stage at that point at the Pilot Light. This is the early aughts.
Mm.
And we're standing around the top of the dude, just staring at him as he's playing. So I don't even know. I've seen there's a point pre-pandemic, I go to 65, 75 shows a year.
No way.
So, yeah. I used to run a music website here in town, and I would go to probably 200 or more shows a year. Like, I am not a smart man. I am not a smart man.
Wow.
How about you? What do you think is the best show you've ever been to?
Well, I think it was the second Born to Run tour of Springsteen's in '76.
Yeah.
And it was at the old Palladium in New York. He played for 3 hours, 11th row. I'll never forget Clarence Clemens in his white suit playing the horn, on back streets and Born to Run. I mean, that one really sticks out for me. I was a big progressive music fan in those days, and I missed Gabriel, but I saw Genesis in like 75-ish.
Holy crap. Yeah.
Nursery Crime, Foxtrot.
Yeah.
I think A Trick of the Tail had just come out, and they were unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's before I went to that gate, I keep pointing at this because it took him forever for this to come out. This is, oh, damn it, it's so heavy. The big ass box set of his latest album.
Huh.
It is heavy as hell. And it took almost a year for it to come out. And I just got it. I have not listened to the new album since then, but
well, I'll be curious to know.
the live show was a lot of the new stuff, and I really like the new stuff. But there was a guy I work with who's 29, and I was like, oh, I'm going to see Peter Gabriel. And the other guy in the room with me is my age. And he was like, who is that? And we both looked at one another. It's like, how the hell do you, crap, you're 29. Of course you don't know who Peter Gabriel is.
Right. That's the thing.
I was like, that's painful, man. But also, in knowing that kid now, I'm like, you would not like Peter Gabriel.
Right.
You're a country dude. You're not into that. Okay, so we're going to go back. So when you first come to Knoxville, like downtown is not that developed at that point. So
Yeah.
what was it like? What part of town did you all move
So we
Because it,
moved, we got a place off a paper mill. We thought,
okay,
get an apartment for a year and sort of learn the town. So we got an apartment off of paper mill, and I was going downtown every day. And there was nothing. There
yeah,
was Mahasti had her place,
yeah,
but other than that, Market Square, there wasn't much. There was, a subway. I mean, there really was not a lot there. Um, but truth be told, I was traveling a bit for work, and my friends in those days tended to be widow people because I was working all the time.
yeah.
And so I really didn't integrate into Knoxville the way others might have until later, because
Okay.
my friends were really widow people.
It was Whittle. I always think about this when I talk to friends who used to work at Scripps Networks. I'm gonna still call it Scripps Networks.
Yeah.
That I would run into somebody and they're like, I work at Scripps Networks. I was like, oh, do you know my friend so and so? And they're like, no, building's too big. So was it like that at Will? Like, did you know Kevin and Julie
Yes, I knew
from
Kevin.
Whittle? Okay,
Yeah, yeah. So Whittle was different than Scripps. Certainly all of the editors and art
right.
directors knew each other. I didn't know all the field people. I didn't know some of the, all of the IT people. But I certainly knew all of the editors, art directors. I may not have hung out with all of them, but I
Yeah,
knew who, I knew names, and I knew, who they were. Like Julie Belcher, we weren't pals, but I knew who she was.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
And did you ever commingle? Because the News Sentinel was just kind of around the corner at that point because they were still downtown.
never.
Did you never? Okay.
No. Whittle was Whittle. I mean, look, I mean, we were, for better or worse, sort of the big game in town in those days.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and Chris fed into that. He wanted us to be that way. I
Yeah.
mean, don't forget, by 91, after we moved into the building, we were a $150 million company. Now, that's 1991 dollars.
That's real money. Yeah.
That's real money.
Yeah.
And there was a lot going on. Channel One, there was something called Medical News Network, which was televisions in doctors' offices.
Huh.
There was a
Okay.
magazine series called Special Report, which was 6 magazines that went into doctors' offices. Plus, there was the magazine division. There was a lot going on. But Chris turned his attention to education. So he really took his eye off of the rest of the company. And also, there was this thing at Whittle where, we were all making decent money, but there were a lot of people making a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was this split. And if I ever write the book, the thing was, when we were in 6 different buildings, it kind of didn't matter that the guy next door was making $250,000 and was a partner, and you were making, a 20% of that. It didn't matter. When we moved into the building, it suddenly mattered.
Hmm.
And the
Okay.
culture of the company really changed. Anyway, Chris turned his attention to education. He started the Edison Project in the spring of 1992. My group went away, so I needed a job.
Yeah.
and we wanted to stay here. Now, again, people forget the Edison project was front page New York Times when Chris announced it. And there's a photo of what he called the core team members. And he had hired, I mean, Chris was all about hiring people for the mantle. And he would always do that. Well, he hired John Chubb, who was at that time the foremost expert on school choice in the country. He hired Checker Finn, who was working at one of the major education think tanks in the country. He hired Nancy Heckinger, who was a sort of technology person. Well, one of the core team members was a guy named Lee Eisenberg, and Lee had been the editor of Esquire. People also forget that Chris and Philip Moffett in the mid-'80s bought Esquire. So Whittle Communications owned Esquire. And in fact, the company was called 1330 for many years. That was the founding of the company because they were going after advertisers who were interested in the 13 to 30 range.
Wow.
That's how it all started. Well, Chris took the company here. Philip took Esquire. That was the split. And again, when we do the 3 hours on Whittle, I'll tell that story.
Yeah.
But so Chris started Edison and he hired Lee Eisenberg. Each of the core team members was allowed to hire one associate to work with them. And I knew the person who was sort of overseeing hiring. And I said to them, get me a meeting with Eisenberg. I want to work for him. He got me the meeting. And I'll never forget, we met at the Hilton. And, you know, it was a couple of New York Jews in Knoxville talking about New York publishing. What got me the gig was Lee, I think what got me the gig. Lee had been one of the founders of Rotisserie League Baseball, which of course became fantasy baseball. But in the 80s, no computers. Again, it was Rotisserie League Baseball, and it was a bunch of editors who founded that. Well, I was in a league in New York starting in, 85, 86, I don't remember. I was one of the first leagues in New York. So I was able to talk about Rotisserie League Baseball for an hour.
Oh my God.
Well, that got me the gig. So that kept me in Knoxville. And I ended up working for Lee on Edison.
Now, was Edison in that building, or where were they at? They were in that building.
So for the first maybe 2 years, Chris then moved to New York. The company essentially broke up. I was the last editor out the door in 95. And that's when they sold the building. Victor sold the building, and, they were able to buy the building for the courthouse.
Yeah.
Edison had moved. I had done all of the edit for Channel 1 back in the day. So for another year and a half, I did work for Channel 1. And then that was it.
And you said when you all moved here, your wife was a writer. Did she stick around at Whittle through all that? Or
so she was freelancing. So the whole time she did a little freelancing for Whittle, but that was not her, she was freelancing for lots of different publications.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that, because in that time, was that hard for her being based in Knoxville to freelance?
Yeah, I think it was. Now, again, she had worked in New York and had worked at the old McCall's, the Old Ladies Home Journal.
Oh, my God.
So, she had our contacts. I mean, I always tell people it would have been really hard for me after Whittle went away had I not worked in New York, because I still had my contacts.
Okay.
And I kept my contacts up. And, I wanted to stay here anyway. And by night, my daughter was born in 93. Knoxville is a great place to raise kids. So I really wanted to stay. because of Edison, I knew a lot about education. So there are plenty of writers and editors who know nothing about education. There are plenty of educators who can't write and edit. Well, I had both.
Yeah.
So the way I like to tell it is I was pushing the swing at my daughter's preschool, and I met this guy who said he owned a marketing communications company. It was based in Oak Ridge, and he was going after an RFP in Nashville with the Department of Education. And I said to him, well, I'll win that for you. You let me do the work, but I'll win that for you. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, I'll win it for you. Well, we did it. I won it. And I ended up working with him on and off for about 10 years. We were working with departments of education all over the country. And in 2006, with a former Whittle colleague of mine, we started our own education-focused communications and marketing company.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and we ended up.
What was the original guy's name? The guy from Oak Ridge.
I'd rather not say.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I've just been working in this world forever. I'm like, and I worked at a print shop for a lot of years. So anybody, I would say there's a strong chance you and I have crossed paths even working there.
I have no doubt.
Like,
I have no
yeah.
doubt.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know, I was working today because I was contacting, do you know a guy named Wendell Burkhart?
I recognize that name. I do.
Yeah, Wendell was a print broker.
Yeah.
Back in the day. And we did a lot of work with Hart Graphics, the old Hart Graphics. And James T. Did you know James T? He's passed away since then, but I
don't recognize that name right off the top of my head.
James Kugler was his name.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's do you know Wayne Bowman?
Yes, I know Wayne Bowman.
Wayne Bowman is the nicest. He's one of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah.
And he and I, every once in a while, he'll name some group. Like we'll talk about DNP, like Davis Newman Payne. I was like, oh, geez. Oh, God. Yeah. Now you're throwing it back, man. Like,
Wayne knows where all the bodies are buried.
Yeah. One of these days, I need to have him on.
He'd be great.
He is oh, God, he's the best. I will say, so here's a funny thing. Did you get involved in the Jewish community here in Knoxville? Like Heska Amuna or?
No, I mean, of course, I know Jewish people in town.
Okay.
I have Jewish friends in town. But again, the best way I can put this is I was very much a 70s New York Jew. So I had a bar mitzvah, but that was the last day I was in a temple.
Okay. Well, see, here's why I mention this, because there are two times on the podcast where I got made fun of with Rachel Milford and Esther Sitver, where I said, I wonder if you know my old boss. And both of them said the exact same thing. We don't know all know one another, Jody. And I said, Jill Weinstein. They're like, oh, yeah, I know Jill. And I was like, it's not about you. It's about Jill.
Right.
Jill is a community connector for a lot of people, not even in that way, but it was just funny to get lambasted and then be like, oh wait, I do actually know who you're talking about. It's like, yeah, because Jill knows everybody.
Right.
Like
that
is more of one of those things. So, so you all went on to form your own thing, A3 Creative.
So in 2006, my friend Randall Duckett and I, former Whittle colleague, we formed A3. And, we were working with foundations, associations all over the country doing essentially marketing communications for education-oriented companies. We did a lot of work with engineering companies.
Okay.
There was this group called Project Lead the Way, which was putting engineering curriculum into high schools.
Okay.
A big client of ours was called NACME, the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. And we did all their work. departments of education in Tennessee and Georgia and Nebraska and all over the country. It was great. And we were doing a lot of booklets for, in the old days, you either were on a college track or a non-college track. And we were doing a lot of work for sort of the non-college track. It was great. The economy went south, as you may remember, in 2009.
Yep.
We were what I like to call a lagging indicator because we had contracts with all these companies. So it really didn't hit us for a couple of years. But then around 2010, 2011, it was getting harder and harder to re-sign because particularly at the state level, their budgets were slashed.
Yeah.
So we got hit pretty hard. My partner had some physical difficulties. So around 2012-ish, we kind of let it go.
Okay.
If you know me, again, I'm all about connections. And these days I like using the word reinvention. I think people need to reinvent themselves all the time. We're taught that it's going to be a straight line. Maybe it's a straight line, or maybe it's a straight line up. Life is not like that. And you have to reinvent yourself in order to survive.
Yeah.
I've always been an editor and I've always been a writer, but my gigs have been different. I've been a magazine editor. I was leading A3. I was always doing something different, but using those skills. In 2012, Brooks Clark, my good buddy, said, "Hey, City View is looking for an editor."
Okay.
So I met the publisher and I became the editor of City View. So I was the editor of City View for 5 years.
Okay. City View. That was, I hate to say this, is it still around?
Well, yes. And that's also, we can pass over that section of my life.
Okay. Okay. At what point did you get into art criticism? Where did that come into this? And you're talking about all the different, places that your life has taken you. Where did that come into be?
Well, I know Jesse
Okay.
Mayshark, and I know Scott Barker. I read Compass. I think it's great. Shout out to Compass. It's so important.
Yeah.
And where are we in 2024? So summer of 2023, most of my work right now is editing books. So most of my clients, I'm helping them with either a manuscript, or I'm editing, or I'm interviewing them to help them with their books. So I'm developing, I'm editing, I'm rewriting, but I hadn't really, and I was teaching, but I really wasn't writing my own stuff. And I just thought, I want to do that. And Jesse and Scott, I think, put something up saying they were looking for people. So I met with both of them and I said, I want to write about artists in town. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
I don't want to do, deep criticism. I want to lift up the artists in Knoxville. I think it's really important. There's so much going on here that people don't know about. We're we're sort of caught in these places and we don't connect. We're in these silos. I want people to know about artists.
Right.
They said, great. So I started doing it. And I called Josh Shorey, who I had met through Amos Oaks.
Amos Oaks. Yep.
I know Amos. And I met Josh at a party and, got to know him. So I said, okay, I'll write about Josh first. And I've been doing it for a year now. And that's how it started.
Okay. How do you know Amos from the community?
So I know Amos through my girlfriend, Sarah Griscom.
Okay. Okay.
Sarah owns Gypsy Hands
Oh, yeah.
and the Little Tea Temple on Central.
Yep.
And
I've got to make a note for something that will be an off-air conversation. Okay.
okay. Yes, Sarah would make a fabulous interview here.
Yeah.
But Sarah, yeah, so Sarah and I have been together for a decade, and she knows Amos, and I met Amos through Sarah.
Okay. He's another one that knows a little bit of everybody.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, he, God, it's going to kill me. Knoxville Community Media. They did the rebrand, and I can never remember
I don't
what that
know
is
either
called.
what
Yeah.
what he's calling it now. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Amos. He also has not been on the podcast yet.
Oh,
So,
cool. Yeah,
yeah, tisk. This is not going to be me patting myself on the back or anything. It has been very important to me since the beginning to not have all white dudes on the podcast. So if you go back to the beginning, it's very rare for you to see two white dudes back to back.
Oh, wow.
And I have been in a cavalcade of white dudes recently to where I'm like, and I always joke that I ask a lot of people, and you know who never says no? White dudes. White dudes love hearing themselves
Oh
talk.
my gosh.
I say that as a white dude. So I will eventually get to Amos, but
Yeah.
so you're doing that for Compass. At what point did you start teaching at UT?
2017, I believe.
Okay.
They needed someone to teach their magazine class.
Okay.
And so I started doing that. We produce a issue of Scoop magazine every spring.
Yeah.
I didn't do it this spring. Hopefully it'll come back, but it's very much I pitch it as sort of, we will produce a magazine, but I'm going to teach you how to think. I'm
Yeah.
going to teach you how to think like a magazine editor. And thinking like a magazine editor means learning how to be thinking all the time about intellectual connections, because everything is a story. And you train your mind, you train yourself to realize everything is a story, and everybody has a story.
Yeah. That's what kind of got me started on this, is the genesis of this. If you've never heard, God, another drinking game for everyone sitting at home for me telling this story again. But I got to start doing like every guest I have on, here's 20 minutes on me before we record, because you don't really know me. So
Right.
I feel like I keep regurgitating the whole story. But I had 2 straight nights of sitting with, do you know Sean Pointner?
Only by name.
Sean,
I don't know Sean.
So Sean Pointner and Dale Mackey own the Central Collective.
Yeah.
Sean's a photographer, Dale's fried pies, all that.
Right.
Sitting with Sean on their deck, talking to, I always get it backwards. I can't remember which one it is. Lance, Derek, that was Dysick, that was a PhD student in UT's creative writing. And we were talking, and he said, I think I'm going to get into astronomy. And so we talked about that. And like 5 minutes later, I was like, dude, I thought you said astrology. And I've just been processing that in my brain this whole time. I was about to say, he was like, look at the stars. I was like, yeah, that means you're a Scorpio. And that means, that kind of stupid stuff.
No,
but that was one night we talked, and we joked and riffed on that for like 30 minutes. But we sat there and talked for like 3 hours. And then the next night we were back, and it was Sean and I and Joachim Schmidt. If you've not met him, he's an interesting dude.
Huh.
He will not talk to you though. God love him. I had him and Sean and David Harmon on the podcast to talk about art, and Joachim said 7 words the entire thing. And then once we turned the mics off, he would not stop talking. I was like, you motherfucker.
Yeah.
But Joachim, from Boston, from Cambridge, and he curated a museum, and he hung art for rich people, including Mitt Romney.
Wow.
Like and he's an artist himself and all that. But we sat there and talked about art for 5 hours. So And I bought the equipment the next day. I was like, I have too many interesting friends not to, that nobody is ever going to interview. And that's not arrogance on my end, but it was like I had a friend who just come back from mountain biking in the Czech Republic. And I was like, that's weird. Let's talk about that. So we talked about it for 3 hours
That's cool.
and sitting out in front of Wild Love, roasting ourselves because it was August and we're not smart. I'm not smart because that's where I set it up. Uh, but yeah, I keep finding these people that are I will tell you the best interview I've ever done. No offense. I say that to everybody. Gail Ann Hinton. She does murals in schools
Huh.
all across the Southeast.
Uh-huh.
She's 80 something years old. She
Mm.
still works 6 to 7 days a week. She jumps up on scaffolding. She takes no guff from no man.
Wow.
She is the greatest. She is my hero. And I sat and interviewed her for like an hour and a half. And it's a thing of beauty. Like she is just an amazing human being.
That
And it
sounds
was
very
great
cool.
to sit down and talk to her.
Wow.
So yes, so there the connections and all that came from another guy I had on, Bud Reese, who is also a sign painter,
Hmm.
that he was like, I see those things and I'm curious about her story. Because he had listened to my podcast and then I followed him and I had him on. So I reached out to her on her Facebook page. She got back to me immediately. She's a great texter, which I did not expect out of an 80 plus something year old person. And she's wonderful, lovely human being. And the minute I got done interviewing her, I sent a text to Bud. I was like, "You're going to have your wish granted, brother," because I just talked to her for an hour and a half, man,
That's
and
cool.
it was a doozy. Um, anyway, no, God bless it. Not enough about me. So, okay, so you're doing the stuff for Compass. You're teaching UT journalism. You're editing books. Um, did you ever think about doing art on your own? Have you ever tried like painting or anything? No, no
No,
interest.
I'm a writer and I'm an editor. I'm not a
Okay.
painter. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay.
have, but I love meeting painters and
Yeah.
sculptors and I like their art but I can't
Yeah.
create that. Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything you would like to see more of in writing or creativity in the world in general? The last few questions are usually my lightning round questions on that are the big questions.
I mean, as we met, I am thinking a lot about art as it relates to Knoxville.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been thinking a lot about how some of those walls can be broken down.
Yeah.
I see a lot of silos at UT. I continue to see some of those silos in the art world here. People are connected, but not that well. There are various groups trying to do things about that.
Yeah.
So, I would just like to see. A friend of mine once said, "Everything in Knoxville is Knoxville's best kept secret." Now,
That
I don't think
perfect.
that's completely, we have big ears. Everybody knows about big ears, but there's
Nope.
really,
In my office, which is 50 plus people, not one person knew what Big Ears was or that it was happening. And you're talking an age range of people in their 60s down to people who are 22. Not one person.
I mean, that's stunning to me.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, 40,000 people descend on your town
Yeah.
and you do not know it's happening.
Well,
Like,
that's really stunning to me. Okay, so even more to my point. So I would like to try to work to break down some of those barriers.
okay.
Yeah.
Is there any dream person you have to work with?
Oh, that's a good question. A dream person I would like to work with. Boy, I'd have to think about that. Uh,
Other than Josh, of course.
other
Josh
than,
Short. I
oh, I
mean,
mean, I could work with Josh tomorrow. There's nobody that sort of, I mean, nobody pops into my head, but That's a great question. I'm going to think about that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I got picked on. There's two guys here in town that Mike McGill and Jamie, that they have a podcast called One More for the Good Guys, and they're both musicians. And we sat in their place and smoked cigars and talked. And I said, there was one point where my dream guest to have on this podcast was Sylvester Stallone.
Really?
To sit down and smoke a cigar, because I'm a huge fan of the Rocky films.
Hmm.
And I think he's a very interesting dude. Although the longer it goes, the less interested I am in having that conversation. Because apparently he has some reality show on now. And I'm like, I'm interested in that dude like 15 years ago.
Right.
Like, I don't know that I'm interested in that dude now, but he's an artist. Like, he does interesting art. Uh, but he was my number one forever. And I don't think he is my number one anymore, but
No, that's
that's
funny.
what I think.
It's funny you say that. I mean, if you had asked me that question maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I might have said David Byrne.
Okay.
I think but he's a little overplayed. I've seen a lot of his interviews. He's on NPR. I mean, he wouldn't be quite as compelling to me anymore.
Right.
Um,
What about Springsteen? Since you mentioned Springsteen earlier.
Springsteen 30 years ago, absolutely.
So, so here's my thing. I'm trying to see these people before they get too old or pass away. And so I, saw Peter Gabriel. I tried to see David Gilmour, and that did not
Mm.
work out because he's not playing much, and the tickets were a mortgage payment,
Hmm.
and I can't justify that. I'm seeing Metallica this August for the first time.
Now, I did see Stevie Wonder when he was here in town
Yeah,
playing like the 30th or 40th anniversary of Songs in the Key of Life.
yeah.
And he played the whole album
Holy
at
crap.
Thompson Bowling. That was great. He was still
Yeah,
great. And they played the album. For me, that's certainly one of my top 10, favorite albums. It was really great.
yeah.
I saw Fleetwood Mac at Thompson Bowling. That was good when Lindsay was still in the
Lindsay.
band.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's another hour conversation. Seeing your heroes when they're older
Yeah.
can be tough.
So my thing is, I have still not seen Springsteen, and I love Springsteen. But if I did, I would want to have one of two options. I want to pick the playlist, or I want him to do Nebraska from beginning to end. That's what I want to see.
Right.
And there's a movie coming out about the making of Nebraska with the kid from uh what, the show on FX, the chef show that everybody freaks out
Yeah,
about.
I know who you mean. I don't know his name.
That guy is playing him making of Nebraska. I was like,
Oh, that's cool.
maybe he'll tour Nebraska in promotion of that movie. That's what I'm holding out hope for, because I love that album. 10th Avenue Freeze Out. I love Born to Run. I love Thunder Road.
Yeah.
But I also love like Brilliant Disguise. I think
Mhm.
some of those late 80s albums are, the songwriting is one step up, one step up.
I've seen Springsteen 5 times
Yeah,
in the 70s and 80s. And, every show was so good.
yeah.
I don't I don't think I would need to see him
No.
now, but that's because I saw him then.
So another one for me is Tool. The
Mm,
last time I saw them at Bridgestone 2016 and I've seen them like 6 or 7 times. That's the best I've ever seen them.
hmm
I'll probably never see them again,
Yeah.
because I was like, I don't need it. That was it. That was the one. I've been seeing them for a long time. That was the one.
Yeah.
One I got lucky, air quotes on, is this was before something happened, but I went to Atlanta and I saw Dillinger Escape Plan, Soundgarden, and Nine Inch Nails.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of the best shows I've ever been to, but it was like 6 months before he passed away.
Hmm.
And it was just like, I got to see him sing, which was unbelievable.
Very cool.
Paint scraping off the walls. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Do you set goals or a checklist? Like, are you like a by the numbers, we got to do this, this, and this?
Well, I have about 70 yellow pads that I
Okay.
have working all the time.
Okay.
So I do it that way, but I'm not necessarily a checklist. I just have the yellow pads. I look at them and I go, okay, what are we going to do today? And that's
Okay.
kind of how I go about things.
And do you know what you'd like to do in the next 10 years?
I have a lot of friends who are retiring, and I do not want to retire. So the answer is I want to continue to be as busy as I want to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't ask you this next question that I normally ask people because it's too late. Usually I ask people, is there any museum or magazine where you'd like to see your work published? But you're already past that.
I
So,
mean, I could still, if I could get in the New Yorker, I wouldn't mind that.
okay. And the last question is, if you could talk to the 14-year-old version of yourself, what would you tell them?
If I were to talk to the 14-year-old version, I would say you're going to be very surprised by how this all turns out. But it's going to turn out well, so just enjoy the ride.
Okay. Thank you for being on.
Thank you very much. This was great fun.